Okay, I think we're live, so hopefully we have sound and vision, and hopefully sound and vision in sync. But with many of these systems, there's only one way to tell, and that's to test them out and to actually do it. And that, I suppose, adage, bit of advice, is something which applies to life as well. And so what I wanted to talk about today is listening, the art of listening, connected to the art of being still, of being present. You've probably read a lot about, or at least heard a lot about mindfulness and being present and mindfulness meditation. Now, that isn't everyone's cup of tea, and for some people, it doesn't work at all. For a lot of people, it does. Meditation in general seems to be a good thing. It is considered to be beneficial to each and every one of us, mentally and physically. But once more, we're all different. However, one of the, let me say, is it a theory because it is practiced so much? Is it still theoretical? Let's say one of the thrusts of the arguments behind being mindful, whether that's meditation or being mindful of what one is doing, being very present, is indeed to be very present. If you've ever found yourself in a situation where time has disappeared, you have forgotten about all your troubles, your trials, your tribulations, and indeed you've been focused on a task at hand, and that task has probably been something which was not really easy, but was not difficult to the point where you couldn't do it at all, we're just getting frustrated. So it took enough of your focus, of your skill, the level of skill that you are at or you were at to get the job done. And in doing so, we can become mindful in a different way, and that is often called being in a state of flow. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the psychologist, has talked about that, coined the phrase many years ago. And again, if you have experienced it, you'll know what I mean. And it's quite extraordinary how time really can distort. You know, you look at your watch and it's 5:30 p.m. and you think, but 5 minutes ago it was 10 p.m. because you are so engrossed in the task. And I would suggest that different types of meditation, certainly mindfulness meditation, simply practicing being mindful of what we are doing, and indeed also being in that state of flow, are different versions of being very present. Very present, if it's mindfulness meditation, about our thoughts, but not engaging with them, at least in some versions. Very present in terms of being in a state of flow, connected to what we're doing, but not aware of those other things that are going on out there, or other issues or challenges. Instead, the focus is on this thing that we're doing. Could be gardening, could be painting, could be sculpting, could be writing. We're just in that moment, we're in that zone. And those altered states of awareness can, as I've suggested, be very, very, very good for us. But what then about being present with other people? And this is where I make the link to listening. If we're present with other people, then the dynamic, in my opinion, changes. And look around you these days. I think there's been little snippets in movies and cartoons and memes about it. There's a famous photograph. I don't think it was a setup. And it's a family at a diner, I believe it is, or a restaurant. They're out somewhere. And it's taken fairly wide angle. And you've got a whole group of people sitting around. And of course, what are they doing? Are they leaning across the table, engaged in animated, vigorous discussion, or laughing at each other, with each other? Could be, but in this photograph, if you haven't guessed already, they're all looking down at their phones. They're looking at the phones. They're engrossed in what is happening on that little screen and not fully present. And I think that it's one of those issues that we all face, because it is really easy to get engrossed in those little screens and the big screens and not be present in quite the same way. Because if you think about it, there's a lot that's been written. You probably know this yourself about the endless scroll, the anticipatory dopamine hits that we're all after. The next thing's going to be the good thing. Our attention getting divided and pulled in different directions, which is not good for us, is challenging for us. It has indeed the effect of reducing our attention spans. I've made a video about that. And that's not a good thing, in my opinion. Our ability to be present has been diminished. And I believe that, again, that is connected to listening and listening properly. If you have ever gone to a get-together, a party, a meeting, a convention, and you've met a few people, then what tends to happen with you, certainly it has happened with me, you get introduced to someone, and a second later, their name is gone. Not always, and maybe you practice making sure that you retain and remember that name. If you meet 3 people, can you do the same thing? You may be lucky, you may be able to do the same thing. Certainly, there have been situations where I've been introduced to someone, and I think, I have now forgotten their name. I don't know who that was. And then maybe you've got to talk to them again. And you have that situation where do you say, sorry, I can't recall your name, which I want to say generally I will do. But sometimes I'm so embarrassed that I don't. I just continue and try and avoid addressing the individual in a way that would require a name to be used, which is fairly pathetic and slightly grim. And there are strategies to help us remember those names, of course. We can talk about that another time. But why does it happen? Most of the time we're thinking about what we're going to say next, or how we're looking to this individual, or the person that we're going to be introduced to next to this individual or further down the line. In other words, we're not fully present once more. We're not there. And the ability to be still and slow down and be with people is crucial. And then I want to make the link to leadership itself. I've talked before about leadership, and if you've listened to any of the videos, you'll hear me talk about positional leadership, where we're in a position of power and influence. Some people call it authority, a loaded term these days, and also self-leadership, which is our ability to, in essence, realize that well, at least for some of us, realize that we have causal agency. We can affect change in our environment. We can forget that, it can be diminished, and at times we can give it away. The internal locus of control, people who have that, so to speak, or to think about the world in that way, believe that they have quite a lot of agency. They can make a difference. They can overcome things. People who have an external locus of control, well, they think that they're, by and large, just being buffeted along by the vagaries, the whims of the weather, the political weather, the corporate weather, the financial weather. And yes, we all do get buffeted along by those things, but someone who is purely external, they believe that it's fate. There's nothing they can do, and they give a lot of their power away. Again, to be clear, I think there are things that are outside of our control, but the people who have this internal locus of control, what do? Well, they focus on those things that they can control, and they also believe that they can control certain things. Not everything. We're not talking about being delusional here. So when we then consider leadership, what I'm in part talking about is this leading of us. And so that ability to access our resources and use them in a way which is aligned to our goals, and I believe should be aligned to something ethical and moral, is partly to do with that self-leadership, but you can also hopefully see that this would also, or should also, apply to positional leadership. That what the leaders that we see around us are doing is also aligned to something ethical and moral, although one could argue that perhaps that isn't always the case. And in fact, I think probably argue quite successfully that isn't always the case. So I'm talking about leadership of self, but I'm also thinking about those times when we're leading something. It could be in the community. It could be, of course, in business. It could be in life. It could be a familial situation. And there are various things that we should do, in my opinion, and should consider doing, at least, when we are in certain positions where we are influencing people. And I guess there's kind of a catch in there, because I believe that when we are with people, we are influencing them, pretty much by and large, all the time. I can't say definitely all the time, but a lot of the time. They're influencing us as well, but we're influencing them. But to make this example clear, the one I'm going to talk about, specifically about listening, I'm going to get you to imagine a leader. I'm going to get you to imagine a leader who is in positional power, influence, and authority. And what happens when that leader goes in and meets a group of people, with some, in your experience. What can happen then is that that leader may not be listening. They may simply be doing the equivalent of, hello, meet Bob. The leader isn't thinking about Bob. They're not being fully present. They're thinking about what they're going to do next. And when a leader goes into a situation, in my opinion, it is very important for that leader to actually listen. But this applies to all of us, applies to us in life as well. And so one way that we can get around that, we can get around making sure that we are present, and the leader can get around making sure that they are present, is to dial down our own internal dialogue. And for some leaders, this also can equate to or include dialing down the ego in the sense of being a little bit self-obsessed, a little bit further along that narcissistic spectrum than they should be. A little bit full of self-importance, because the leader who's like that can go into a group and, again, maybe present, but not present with the individual, present in their own head about what big decisions they're going to make next, and they're not listening, they're not there. And what that can then mean is that they are causing an output, a ripple in that group and that team with that individual, because the individual, as often as not, people aren't stupid, picks up on it. The individual looks at his leader and thinks, you're not listening. You're not fully present. And imagine then that the situation is one of pressure. It's one of perhaps chaos. There are challenges in the business, threats, change, financial, markets, personnel, whatever. This leader needs the team in those moments to help, to be on board. So here's a couple of things that listening can do. First of all, if the leader is fully present and listening, it shows respect. The other person picks up on that. The other person thinks, I am being included here. I'm actually being listened to. And that's one of the criterion for an environment which is psychologically safe. A psychologically safe environment is one in which people feel that it's okay to turn up as them. Now, yeah, maybe there are dress codes, etc., and maybe language codes, but they can turn up as them. They can be there and they will be listened to. Their opinions, their ideas will be taken on board. They might not be used or followed, but if they're not, They'll be treated with respect. They'll understand why what they said, what their suggestion was, wasn't actually put into practice this time. And there will be no reprisals. There will be no sneakiness. The leader saying, yeah, all opinions welcome. And then 2 weeks later, as this person who gave an opinion is sitting quite quietly, there's a metaphoric slap on the back of the neck and a little whisper in the ear. Don't ever do that again and disrespect me in front of other people. That is not psychologically safe. And you can see, hopefully, that I'm suggesting that if psychological safety is here, then over here is a kind of bullying atmosphere, which is not conducive to, well, the formulation of ideas. And it's certainly not conducive to mental and therefore physical well-being. And I see so many organizations and leaders and groups and teams and communities or parts of communities do exactly this, that they are not present and they shout each other down. And what do? They reduce the ability to solve the problem. Because if the leader is in a crisis situation, where do most of the solutions lie? They lie with the people who are in the organization. They lie with those individuals, but to extract them, to get the input, they have to feel that it's okay. It's okay to say some crazy things. It's okay to give this left field suggestion, this left field answer, because at least it will be considered and they won't be made a fool of and they won't be ridiculed. And funnily enough, one of those crazy answers could be the one that saves the day. Very often let me just say, it's surprising how often that is actually the case. And why might that be, as an aside? Because one of the things that can happen in a crisis of when people are finding themselves under pressure is they're into tramline thinking. And if everyone's ideas have been diminished, oppressed, then they learn not to speak up. It's conditioning. And they're just into an echo chamber. And yes, people around the leader. And they might not even realize that their ability to think laterally has been reduced and diminished and is on these tram lines. And so when we create an environment where people feel respected and feel listened to and understand that it's safe to speak up, then you get those ideas. And very often, but not always, the problem can be solved and solved in-house. So there's, I guess, one key reason that listening is important. The employee feels listened to. Simple statement, but the ramifications, the ripple effect of that is huge, because as I've suggested, this can mean that problems are solved. Now, here's the other thing that it can do. It can teach the leader, and this can be essential. The leader will learn, if they listen and pay attention, that they've got this huge wealth of talent. Often they find this out, that they didn't know was there. Because suddenly people speak up. Suddenly they feel that they're listened to. Suddenly they feel that I will put this idea forward because maybe I can have an input without reprisals. And maybe this leader is actually paying attention. So this may not mean that the team or the group or whoever it is in a crisis at that point in time, but the leader gets the information that, hey, I've got a talented bunch of people here. And that could be a sort of virtuous cycle where they treat people a bit differently. They treat them with the respect that they deserve. So how can the leader do this? Well, listen, number one, let's not beat about the bush. Hello, leader person. Hello, you. Hello, me. Shut up and listen. But if a leader is kind of along the egotistical route, if they're slightly further along that spectrum towards the dreaded narcissus, then it is important for them to dial that ego down, as I've said, to dial down the chatter and become curious. Curious is a key word here for all of us. Curious is so important. If we are curious when we are around people and around individuals, and again, I'm particularly thinking in this example to keep it contained and not go off in too many different directions, if the leader is curious, this can help dial down that ego. Curious about what? Well, Curious because, a little mantra for each and every one of us to bear in mind, and particularly my leader in this example, is that other people know things that you don't. They know things that you don't. So imagine, again, let's paint the picture. Let's go back to our imaginary leader. They're egotistical. They're full of themselves. They think they know it all. Somebody starts to come up with a solution. What does the leader say? Yeah, okay, moving on. Or they don't even really hear it because they're making the assumption that what the person is saying is going to be wrong because the leader thinks, well, I have the answers. If they become more curious and say to themselves, the people I'm going to meet this morning, they know things I don't know. My job is to be humble. So again, some key words: listening, curious, present, humble. Humility in the sense that I need to look around and consider that I don't know everything. And if a leader has set a team up properly, they won't know everything, and they shouldn't. It's quite unhealthy. What are these other people doing? It's not leadership, it's just a one-person show. They know everything and are doing everything. If we set teams up properly, then this is in life, it's in sport, it's all over. We should be comfortable enough with ourselves to know that other people know other things that we don't. And when you've ever listened to an expert, or you've been enthralled by what someone's saying, or you've gained information from them, what is going on in your mind? Generally, it's like appreciation. One thing, isn't it? It's like, hey, I'm learning stuff here. I'm really interested in what this individual is saying. What are you not doing? You're not saying to yourself, I've heard all that before. And if you do say that, well, then you're not listening and you haven't learned. And maybe you do know what has been said before, particularly if it's in a video or training context. Yes, absolutely, that could be the case. But in a dynamic situation, when the environment is changing and the challenges are changing and shifting, by and large, we're going to learn something. Even if it's just to boil the water probably before you put the tea bag in or something. There's generally a takeaway. But if you imagine also, if we have our leader who's present, who's curious, who's being humble, dialing down that ego, because they are presuming, probably most of the time correctly, that they will learn things from other people, that other people know things that they don't. Well, we're unlocking that creativity, we're unlocking those left field ideas. And this is so important in that crisis, because again, when the going gets tough and the fight and flight responses kick in, then our thinking can become very narrow and quite, let's say, basic and quite blunt rather than nuanced. And nuanced tends to be where the left field stuff is, and I guess the right field as well. This is right for me. And the solution would be right as well as left. So that's my thinking about the importance of listening and being present and not jumping in to interrupt someone and not thinking about who the next person is we're going to meet, to be present, to be curious, to be humble, to, of course, on top of that, ask questions. I'm not going to cover that here. That's a whole other topic, but asking questions. Sometimes people will say, well, start with broad questions, start wide. And you could, absolutely, and that is a very good strategy. But when someone's giving information and we're being humble about it, then some of the questions could be directed to tease apart what this issue actually is. We've got to be careful of our own assumptions when doing that, which is why people say start wide, so that we don't jump in with what we think the person has said, because we have our solution in mind rather than theirs. So it is often better to start wide, but that wouldn't always happen, as I have experienced myself, either by being quite directive in terms of a question, I think correctly, sometimes not though, or being the receiving end of that. And This is not, I come back to reiterating, just to do with positional leadership. I think there's a power and a strength to it in life. And let's flip back then to the family around this table who are looking at their phones. Are they present? Are they being respectful? Are they learning anything? Are they finding out what other people are thinking, feeling? Are they gaining the information, the stuff that they don't know about? Or you're young and you're in that job. How can I learn something from you? Well, how could you be such an egomaniac? Be a bit more humble. Be interested in what the person is saying. Be curious to learn the things that you don't know about. So, we've got a couple of comments. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mike. I'm half present. Yes, it is. It's funny these days, isn't it, that so many of us are exactly that, or a tenth or a quarter. And people talk about multitasking, but it isn't efficient, and most of us are really rubbish at it, and we're better sticking to one thing for a period of time, taking a break and going to the next task. And also, there's a lot of studies, you probably read them or heard about them, when people are driving, and it's why they've said no phones. Don't pick up a phone. Don't hold it and be so engrossed in that conversation, because our reaction times slow down. There is also an argument that we shouldn't be talking on a phone at all, even if it's hands-free. There's debate around that right now. And then you might be saying, well, what about talking to the person beside you? Well, the difference seems to be that if we talk to someone beside us when we're driving, they can act as an extra co-pilot, or not an extra co-pilot, as a co-pilot, as another driver, because they may see something, they may alert us. They can also be aware of the fact we're having to concentrate at various times, because they generally are much more aware of the environment and situation than someone who would be on the phone actually would be. So half present is another issue, and we train ourselves to be half present. We train ourselves not to be fully present. We train ourselves to think, yeah, I can do this over here and do that at the same time. And some people can, of course, with a very simple task and a complex task, do both. But it's surprising when you look at the research how quickly that breaks down and how utterly rubbish we tend to be at it. And it's also labor intensive and more tiring. It tires out the executive suite much more quickly, and we need that a lot of the time to solve the problems that we face in life. And there was also another comment. I was reading a book called Persuasion, by James Borg. Is that the people with the cube and that the Starship Enterprise had to fight? That Borg? Possibly not. You see, there's no feedback. I cannot hear the uproarious laughter at that point in time. Sorry, rubbish joke. I think I've read that book, Persuasion by James Borg. It gives tips to remember people's names in a large meeting or social situation. Yes, I think. Thank you for the laughter. You won't be able to hear this on the video, but trust me, there's a lot of laughter after that really pathetic joke. There are some tips. And I don't know if it's from the James the Borg book, but one I can recall is to just try and get a hook for the person's name, which could be connected to Bob. So we use Bob because I mentioned Bob. And some people say, well, just imagine this person sort of bobbing around in the ocean, and I guess you can maybe add a hook on top to rescue them. And just that quick mental image, and then repeat the name, of course, so other people say, yeah, you can do that, but you can also say to this individual immediately, well, good to meet you, Bob. and that can help, but don't overdo it. You know, I always think when I read that bit of advice, hello, Bob, good to meet you, Bob. Do you want a drink, Bob? I'm going to the restroom, Bob. I'll be back in a minute, Bob. Thank you very much. You'll remember the name, but people will think you're very odd. But yeah, there are strategies. It's about influencing people in business. Yeah, not in a controlling way. Some people get freaked out when we talk about influencing, or people talk about influencing, I should say. Influencing others, we're doing all the time. That's worth bearing in mind. We're influencing people all the time. Right now, if you've stuck with this video long enough, if you're watching it live, then I am influencing you. Maybe not in a good way. Maybe you're bored. Maybe you're about to go and meet Bob for a cup of tea because he's more interesting. But we're influencing, and in social groups, we're influencing each other just on an ongoing basis. And we're very adept at reading social cues and clues and facial expressions and body language. Some people more adept than others, to be fair. Some people miss the signs quite badly, and we've probably all done that. But by and large, we're picking up those cues and clues. We're herd creatures, we're tribal creatures initially. We survive in the tribe. So we've got to notice when there's a ripple of something coming through the air. When, oh, hold on a second, there's a predator out there. I'm noticing something shifting in people's body language and facial expressions. I think during the lockdowns, there was a lot of that going on, that people were suffering from high levels of anxiety, and that sort of free flow anxiety that was in the air. Not for everyone, but for some people in some groups, we're picking this nervousness up. So influencing is definitely not about doing things in some sort of underhand way. I wouldn't recommend that at all. Normally people notice it and think this is a bit odd, what's going on. Influencing is just something that goes on, and I believe we should make it as positive an experience for everyone around us. So oh my gosh, that's 31 and a half minutes at this point in time. So I hope you found that useful, and I hope you found it a little bit different. I'm weaving in some of the things that I've talked about. Well, I talk about some of this stuff to people anyway, and I have mentioned bits and pieces of it in videos. And I'm also just trying out the sound and vision on the live version of this platform. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. All I've got to do now is figure out how to stop this, and we'll communicate and influence each other this way going forward in the future. For the moment, from me, bye for now. Bye-bye.